Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. We are back with a live stream. Shout out to everyone in the live chat. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different boxing news stories in this stream. Obviously, the main one is Moses Itauma pulling out of his fight with Jermaine Franklin, citing an apparent injury. The entire card has been cancelled, or should I say postponed, until the back end of March. All right, we'll talk about it. But we've got a bunch of other stuff to get through as well. Before we do, though, let's see who we got here in the live chat. We got Stereo Broadcast Boxing, Project Leroy, Jack Trussler. We got Supreme Tic Tac, okay. We got Jerry. We got David Fisher, Tony S, Philip Answer, Trolls Are Bad. Big up, big up. How you guys doing? Yeah, the likes are looking crazy. We got 51 concurrent viewers, only 5 likes. If we can stick some likes on this stream, it'll be much appreciated, folks. Only takes a split second, really helps stream visibility. So if everyone can stick a like on this stream, thank you in advance. All right, let's try and keep the views to likes ratio around 50%, or at least 50%. Big up Warren Williams. We got Richard. We got Tiger. Faraz, big up Faraz. Martin Temple. All right, so let's get straight into it then. Moses Itauma pulls out of Jermaine Franklin fight. Entire card postponed. New Franklin fight date announced. Itauma's fight against American Jermaine Franklin has been rescheduled for March after the British heavyweight picked up an injury while training. The fight, which was due to take place on the 24th of January at Manchester's Co-op Live Arena, will now take place at the same venue on the 28th of March. Now, boxing is a contact sport. As such, injuries are not only a reality and are going to happen, but there's going to be a lot of them. However, another reality in boxing is that boxing fans are accustomed to being lied to by promoters, lied to by managers, and even lied to by fighters themselves. And because of all this lying the boxing fans have had to endure over the years, a lot of boxing fans are not so quick to accept the official reason for fighters pulling out of fights at face value. Boxing fans are suspicious when somebody pulls out of a fight. And in this case, with Itauma pulling out of the fight against Franklin, they're suspicious because of an interview that he did some weeks ago, which has apparently now been pulled. And a lot of people were saying that Itauma looked a little off in the interview. Now, I did see it, and I personally didn't notice anything much different from Itauma as far as the way he was talking, his demeanor, etc., from normal, because Itauma does have this monotone, kind of monged out, for lack of a better term, way of speaking. And a lot of the young kids, particularly in the south of the UK, London and some of the home counties, they're like that as well. So I didn't find Itauma's interview, the one where people think he sounded really off, to be particularly different to what we normally get from him. He has this monged out, monotone way of talking, which is totally at odds with the way he fights. Because in the ring, he's very sharp, he's very on it, he's very energetic. But in interviews outside the ring, he's like, yeah, Moses Itauma, as if he's some type of stoner. But like I say, he's always been like that. He's always come across in most interviews, not in all interviews, but in most interviews like that. So to me, that wasn't necessarily a red flag or alarm bells. But other people think they've seen something and they're concerned for Itauma. Now, and obviously those people are the ones speculating that perhaps this injury is not legit. They want to see proof of the injury, and there's no problem of them wanting to see proof of it. And they think that there's something else going on. Now, some people are thinking it's poor ticket sales because the Franklin fight wasn't really being publicized that well, in the opinion of many. But others are thinking maybe Itauma enjoyed himself a little bit too much over Christmas, and maybe he wasn't having a good camp, not looking good in sparring. You get the picture. I have no idea whether any of that is the case or whether the injury is legit. I don't know. So I'm not going to come to any concrete conclusions here. I'm just going to entertain the various possibilities. All right. What I can say is that throughout my years watching boxing and being involved in boxing, I've observed that a lot of the most talented fighters, the most precocious fighters, suffer from overconfidence and therefore complacency. Because boxing comes so easy to them, they think they can get away with certain things. And there are certainly rumors that Itauma is somebody who likes a drink and maybe likes the ladies, and nothing wrong with liking the ladies, obviously, but I'm saying it's possible to get distracted by the ladies if you like them as much as some people claim Itauma does, okay? And obviously, boozing and womanizing during training camp is not a good look. That's not conducive to producing your best form on the night. So again, this is all speculation, it's all rumor. None of this has any concrete proof to it. But there are some people saying that that's what's going on with Itauma. That he's maybe starting to go off the rails already because of the amount of hype that surrounds him, because of the fact he is very talented. And, you know, he went in there against the likes of Dempsey McKean and also Dylan White, maybe himself expecting to get some rounds in. In fact, I saw an interview with him recently where he said that he expected the Dylan White fight to go a few rounds. The fact that he blasted both of those guys out as early as he did, fights which were supposed to be step-ups, what's that going to do to his ego? Do you know what I mean? Is that going to make him more determined to train hard? Or is it going to take the edge off him a little bit? That's a question for you guys. Again, certainly boxing has been littered with examples of fighters, Mike Tyson being the perfect example. People compare Itauma to Mike Tyson, even though stylistically they're totally different. But I guess the age and, you know, the precocious talent and all that, there's something to be compared there. But Mike Tyson, once he reached world championship level, had a lot of distractions. People pulling him this way, that way. He was certainly boozing, womanizing, and doing all sorts of other stuff, which didn't help him. Even when he was in his prime, okay? When he was in the lead up to the Tony Tucker fight, he claimed, it was in a Ring magazine interview, I think somewhere, way back in the days, one of those boxing magazines that I used to read in the 1990s. And he said that he was out partying and boozing and whatnot in the run-up to the Tucker fight. And that's the fight where he became undisputed. Okay? When Mike Tyson turned pro, he was obviously managed by Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton. Cus D'Amato was overseeing things, but Cus D'Amato passed away after Mike Tyson's maybe 11th or 12th fight, something like that, maybe 14th fight. It was quite early on in Mike Tyson's career. He was fighting extremely frequently because one of the goals was to try and break Floyd Patterson's record. And obviously Floyd Patterson was also trained and managed by Cus D'Amato, or trained at least, I think maybe managed as well, by Cus D'Amato. So Cus D'Amato had the formula for getting the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, right? So that was one of the goals with Mike Tyson coming up, but his management team, Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton, also could see that Mike was a wild kid, all right? And they thought that if they give him too much time too much downtime in between fights, he's going to get in trouble and he's going to go off the rails. And we don't want that to happen. So we got to get him from the arena, from a fight, back to the gym. From the arena, back to the gym, all the time, and keep him occupied with boxing. If we don't keep him occupied with boxing, he's going to get into trouble. Okay, we're going to have problems. That philosophy obviously worked, right? Getting Mike Tyson to the top. After that, things fell apart eventually, but Moses Itauma's handlers would be well advised to try and do the same thing with him. There's already been people in the live chat of this stream so far saying Itauma's not been anywhere near busy enough. I completely agree. A guy of this age, with this much talent, who's this confident, who's getting all this hype and adulation, it's very difficult for a young guy like that to keep his feet on the ground when boxing seems so easy for him at the minute. And some people have speculated that Itauma doesn't really love boxing. He himself said on the way up, when he was an amateur, that he had to be dragged back to the gym by his brother at times. And his brother is nowhere near the talent that he is. Sugar Ray Robinson, for example, was a fantastically talented fighter. He wasn't really in love with boxing. His first love was apparently dancing, right? And he did at one point try to pursue like a singing and dancing career or whatever the case may be. But yeah, some guys are like that. They have all the talent in the world, but it isn't their first love. Could it be that Itauma is one of those guys? Maybe. Shout out to Matt Borgerson for the super chat. He says, what are your thoughts on the theory that Itauma is being navigated carefully because he is potentially a vulnerable fighter? I don't personally buy that. I think he's been navigated relatively quick if you look at the fights he's taken. The issue with Itauma is that he's not having enough fights. He's going in there and he's blasting guys out who were supposed to get him some rounds. And with that being the case, you need to get him back in the ring against anybody, as other people have said in the live chat so far. Stick him in there against a pie every 6 weeks. Keep him active. It is absolutely imperative with a young guy like this that you keep him as active as possible. Queensbury are not doing that. Now, maybe they're at fault to some extent. Maybe it's Itauma's fault outside the ring. We don't know what type of character he is. How easy it is to keep him interested in boxing. How easy it is to keep him in the gym training. How easy it is to keep him disciplined. Some fighters are disciplined all by themselves. They don't need any extra motivation from other people. But we don't know what the case is with Itauma. But no, I certainly don't buy the notion that he's being moved carefully because he's a vulnerable fighter. I don't think he is being moved particularly carefully. I mean, you look at him, what is he, 14-0? He's already fought Dylan White, Dempsey McKean. Jermaine Franklin is the fight now coming up. So I don't think he's been navigated particularly carefully. I mean, again, you compare the guys he's been fighting to the guys that Mike Tyson was fighting in his first 14 bouts, or even the guys Lennox Lewis was fighting in his first 14 bouts. I'm telling you, those guys weren't fighting, particularly Mike Tyson. He wasn't fighting anyone better than the guys that Itauma's fighting in his first 14. Lennox Lewis, you maybe argue, was. I think he might have fought Gary Mason in his 14th bout, and Gary Mason is better than anyone Itauma has fought so far. Don't quote me on that, but it was very early on in Lennox Lewis's career when he fought Gary Mason. It might have been 14th fight or so. But yeah, big up Matt Borgerson for the super chat. Sometimes with these precocious fighters, they can be victims of their own success. The ease at which they dispatch of opponents, the adulation they get, the obvious talent, the backslappers, people hyping them up, including myself. I'm very excited about his potential, but all of this can go to a fighter's head. And Itauma many times has basically alluded to the battle that he fights in his own mind regarding the feedback from the public, right? He talks about how he doesn't try to, take on board praise or criticism because either one can be detrimental. from the public. He takes on praise and criticism from his team, but as far as from the public and pundits, he tries to block all that stuff out. So who knows what's going on? Maybe we're, making a mountain out of a molehill here. Maybe it's just a genuine injury. It's a contact sport. It happens, right? But even if it is a genuine injury, there is a legitimate concern from boxing fans regarding the lack of activity for this young fighter. Nowhere near enough fights, not even close. And I do want to blame maybe the Warrens for the Dillian Whyte situation, because that fight was on pay-per-view, okay? Maybe that's what it took to get Dillian Whyte in the ring. They had to pay him a certain amount of money, get him in the ring. But once you move to the stage where you're a pay-per-view fighter, you're not going to be fighting every 2 months, are you? All right? And so that was the concern from myself and many others. Like, what are we doing here? This is a guy who needs development. They shouldn't be thinking about pay-per-views until he's, at world championship level at least, fighting for world titles at least. Up until then, keep him busy. Keep his visibility as high as possible, and that means not putting him behind an additional paywall, right? So, I share the concerns that everyone else shares regarding Itauma and his development, not being active enough. In fact, there was somebody who, I guess he was a Mike Tyson fanboy or an Itauma hater. I don't like using that word, but that's the best I can come up with for this particular scenario. And he challenged me on the notion that Itauma's opposition at this stage is actually a bit better than Mike Tyson's opposition after his first 13, 14 fights. And the guy said, well, no, that's not quite correct, because Mike Tyson was fighting so often. Mike Tyson had those 14 fights in a very short space of time, and therefore he was nowhere near as developed after 14 fights as Itauma is. I mean, that is just absolute nonsense, okay? Because activity, everyone knows, activity is absolutely crucial to building momentum. What does building momentum mean? Building momentum means momentum in your improvements, right? Because when you're out of the ring so much, you're fighting so infrequently, your development doesn't snowball in the same way as it does when you're active. So what happens is you start to improve, right? And then because there's massive gaps in between your fights, you start to regress a bit. Sometimes with the fitness and also with the skills, your tools can get blunted. From inactivity, your tools can get rusty. And so when you get back in the gym, you're basically playing catch up to try and get back to where you were in the run up to your last fight. So no, Mike Tyson wasn't way behind Itauma after 14 fights because he'd been pro for a much shorter space of time. The opposite is actually the case. Mike Tyson, in terms of his development, was ahead of Itauma after 14 fights because he was so active. Yeah, his improvements became exponential. His improvement was able to snowball because he wasn't having big gaps between fights. Particularly at a young age, guys like this who are very talented, they can improve so fast if you give them activity. You'd be amazed how much they can improve from one session to the next. Never mind one fight to the next, one gym session to the next. So, yeah, Itauma needs the activity. He's not being moved at the pace as far as activity. I'm not talking about quality of opposition. I got no issue with the quality of opposition after 14 fights. He just needs to be fighting more often, bro. Even if they just get him out against pies while they're trying to negotiate fights with more notable names, just stick him in there against anyone and keep him ticking over. That's the way it's done. But I don't know what the Warrens are doing. The Warrens normally are great at building fighters, but maybe they've never had a talent like, or haven't had a talent like this for so long, they're not quite sure how to maneuver him. Who knows? We can only speculate regarding what's going on behind the scenes. All right. But those are my thoughts on that. Shout out to everyone in the live chat, everyone locking in to this live stream. So let's move on to the next story then. Kabayel had a homecoming in Germany. This past weekend, he defeated an obscure Polish fighter. And there were some silly comments, as always, in the comment section of my post-fight video. Very good comments, but, a few silly ones. So one of the silly comments from, I guess, a fan of the opponent, Niba, the Polish guy, he said, if you don't know who Niba is, you need to, pick a different sport, pick a different thing to make content about than boxing. Basically saying that if you don't know who this Niba guy is, you must be some type of super casual and, what a ridiculous load of nonsense. I've been covering boxing on YouTube for what is it now? 16 years? I've been watching boxing since the 80s. I was an amateur boxer myself. Of all the boxing knowledge I've got, of all the fights I've covered, of all the obscure fighters I've talked about, because I don't know this one obscure Polish heavyweight, oh no, you must shut down your whole channel because you don't know give it a rest. Some butthurt Niba fanboy from Warsaw there. Very, very silly stuff. In one of the other comments, people were really upset with me saying that Kabayel is basically part of the Turkish community. Some people pointed out that there's 1 million Kurds or something in Germany, so there are plenty of Kurds to turn up to Kabayel's fights. It doesn't have to be a bunch of Turks. Okay, there's loads of Kurds in Germany. There's far more Turks in Germany. And, Kurdish is an ethnicity. It's not a country. There's no country called Kurdistan. It's a region in northern Iraq, all right, Kurdistan. And in case you didn't know, the majority of Kurds on earth live in Turkey. And as I understand it, Kabayel's family have lived in Turkey for several generations. His parents were born there and so on. So are they not Turkish? Are they not Turkish Kurds? Obviously, Turkic is an ethnicity as well, but whatever. People always want to nitpick everything you say when you make YouTube videos. It's unbelievable. I'm no expert on the intricacies of, Turks and Kurds and all this kind of stuff, and I do realize that there's been conflict between, Turkey and region for a long time. I get that. I'm well aware of that. But for all intents and purposes, I put it this way. There was a guy who's no longer in my element group, but used to be, who was Turkish. And I asked him about the whole, Turkish Kurdish thing with Kabayel. And he says most Turks that he knows embrace him. So that is what that is. Anyway, we're not here to talk about all that. We're here to talk about Lawrence Okolie calling Kabayel out after the fight he had over the weekend. Now, Okolie's standing there looking like Jon Snow, right? A member of the Night's Watch. And you've even got the snow in the background, right? Dressed like a crow. Say what you like about Lawrence Okolie, and we've all given him fair criticism regarding his holding and stuff like that in the past. But no fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism. Okolie deserves praise for the way that he's always been up for tough challenges. This has never been a guy who's wanted to be treated with kid gloves in his career. Yeah? As a cruiserweight, he ran through the domestic scene quick. This wasn't a guy who had to be shamed into fighting his domestic rivals. No, he went that traditional route and he did not shy away from it in the slightest. Were there some ugly performances? Absolutely. Okay? But you give him credit for fighting the people he was supposed to fight at the relevant stages of his career. All right? When he reached world level, he was trying to unify. He fought Chris Billam-Smith in Bournemouth, etc., etc. Lost that fight. Horrible fight, by the way. So say what you want to say about his performances, and there's plenty of valid criticisms there. He's always been up for fighting top fighters, always. And it appears to be the same at heavyweight. Since moving up to heavyweight, he did try to step in to fight Joseph Parker when Daniel Dubois pulled out of the Parker fight. That's a known fact. Team Parker decided not to choose Lawrence Okolie in the end and instead to choose Martin Okolie. All right? Okolie, as far as I can remember off the top of my head, is the only guy who's been calling Kabayel out since Kabayel emerged as a dark horse, you know, beating the Makhmedovs and Zheli Zhangs and Frank Sanchez's. Okolie's the only guy I can recall calling him out. And I don't think it's cap. I don't think Okolie is clout chasing. I think he genuinely wants to fight Ajit Kabayel. And here he is. He attended Kabayel's fight. He's in Germany. He's dressed up like, again, Jon Snow or something, a member of the Night's Watch. He's got the 2 WBC belts from, well, I guess one of them he might hold now, some type of WBC trinket, and he was WBC Bridgeweight champion. Was he WBC Cruiserweight champion? I don't think so. I forget now. But anyway, and by the way, Lawrence Okolie is literally hilarious. He's got this deadpan sense of humor. And when he was asked about this extravagant coat he turned up to the Kabayel fight wearing, he said it's made of Kurdish bear. Now, obviously, he's being facetious. It's not really made of Kurdish bear. I suspect it's made of Chinese bear and not a real bear. But, you know, I suspect this is like Chinese imitation fur. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I suspect that's what it is. You know, a Chinese fur coat for Lawrence Okolie. But as I say, credit to him for actually being willing to step up and call Kabayel out. Kabayel has emerged as somewhat of a boogeyman, a dark horse and a boogeyman in the heavyweight division. If we look at the heavyweight rankings here, you'll see Lawrence Okolie is only ranked by 2 of the 4 major sanctioned bodies in their top 15. The IBF have got him ranked at number 7, and the WBC have got him ranked at number 1. So he's right there, 1 place below Ajit Kabayel, who's currently the interim champion. So at some point, Okolie's going to get his shot either against Usyk or against Kabayel, as long as he doesn't lose in the meantime. So he's calling Kabayel out. What do I think if that, what do I think would happen if that fight were to take place? You know what? I would pick Kabayel to win, but I'd give Lawrence Okolie a decent shout. I'd make Kabayel maybe a 60-40 favorite, maybe 65-35. Okolie believes that Niba on the weekend showed the blueprint of how to beat Kabayel, because he was catching him with a lot of clean shots. And he thinks that someone physically stronger, more accurate, and more powerful would take what Niba did and build on it and get the job done and get the victory. The thing is, I do think Okolie is much more dangerous at heavyweight than most people realize now. But I think he'll be most dangerous and most effective against heavyweights who give him time and space to get his right hand off. For me, Lawrence Okolie's biggest issue in his career has always been when fighters are able to get past his reach and shut him down. That's when he panics. He doesn't have the coordination up close to coordinate those long octopus-like arms to shorten the shots quickly and fend people off with punches on the inside. And so because he doesn't have that ability biomechanically to do that, he just starts grabbing, incessantly grabbing. But if you give him time and space, if you're more of a boxer and you're on the outside against him, you're in danger at heavyweight. I'm telling you, you're in danger because he is quite clever. He moves around quite well, despite the fact he's enormous now, right? But he still moves around quite well. And if he can get that right hand off, you're going to have problems. He did a much better job. Obviously, he didn't stop Kevin Lerena, but in terms of not taking punishment and keeping Lerena in his box, he did a much better job with Lerena than Daniel Dubois did, right? And he did it with one arm. His jabbing arm was out of commission. You could see it at the end of the fight, that it was hanging. So I think he had a separated shoulder or an elbow. I can't remember what it was, but he definitely had some type of issue with that arm. No doubt about it. It wasn't a fake injury. That was a real injury. So he basically couldn't jab the way that he wanted to jab, and he was having to just throw right hands. And that limits the way that he can set the right hand up, of course, and limits the way he can control the fight. But he still managed to beat Kevin Lerena without any issues. So, yeah, I do think Okolie is a bit underrated at the moment at heavyweight, but he'll need to control that weight, though. Yeah, for his last fight against Tete, that's ridiculous. You don't need to be coming in the 270s. Just because you are a heavyweight, it doesn't mean that you should weigh whatever the hell you want. It's not going to be to his benefit to be piling on the pounds like that in between fights. I think Okolie shouldn't be weighing any more than, let's say, 245. In my opinion, as a heavyweight, 250 an absolute push, but more like 245 tops. So, yeah, I give credit to Okolie for calling Kabayel out, but stylistically, I think Kabayel's all wrong for him, to be honest. Kabayel's a guy that will close you down, that will hit you with body shots, who is very physical. Not the best stylistic matchup for Okolie. I mean, maybe he catches Kabayel with something big, hurts him, intimidates him, and is able to control him. But I think there's a greater chance that Kabayel gets to him first before he gets to Kabayel. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I'd be picking Kabayel in that fight. But it's boxing, particularly heavyweight boxing. Our opinions are just opinions. Fights are won and lost in the ring. Okay, so let's see the fight happen. Let's see Okolie versus Kabayel if Kabayel can't get that Usyk shot in the near future. And he should get that Usyk shot. Usyk shouldn't be fighting Deontay Wilder. He should be fighting Ajagba. All right? Okay, somebody said he was a bicep tear. Yeah, that's right. His bicep looked off. I just remember in the corner, after the fight, you could see a shot of, on video, a shot of Okolie's arm, and it looked off. It looked very off. And it's either the shoulder was hanging out or there was an issue with the bicep. It's been a long time since I watched the fight. But yeah, you could see there was something seriously wrong with his arm. People are saying Lawrence the Burger sauce Okolie. Well, he did used to work in McDonald's. Do you know what I mean? Maybe he's bringing his old McDonald's ways to his boxing career, Needs to stop that. So, moving on from Lawrence Okolie, Kabayel. Shout out to everyone in the live chat. This is a news story, right, which just popped up on my radar over the past couple days. I'm not sure how many of you guys knew about this. Efe Ajagba is set to fight Charles Martin on February the 14th. Is that Valentine's Day 2026? Inside the UFC Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada, as part of a Zuffa boxing event. So we've been hearing all this about the Dana White, Turkey Al-Sheikh, Nick Khan Boxing League. Well, here we have an example of one of the fights that's going to take place in that league. Now, it's not a particularly high-level fight. I guess Efe Ajagba's a top 10 heavyweight, but Charles Martin certainly isn't. This really looks like, if it wasn't taking place in this Zuffa boxing thing, it would just look like a stay busy for Efe Ajagba. He should beat Charles Martin without too many issues, right? But it's interesting that Ajagba has decided to go down this route. I'm not saying it's a bad move for him. It's just an interesting move, right? Last I checked, Ajagba was with Bob Arum promotionally. Has that relationship now ended? I'm assuming it has, for him to be fighting on a Zuffa boxing card. As it says here, Zuffa Boxing 2 has locked in its second main event. So this is going to be a main event for Zuffa Boxing. Not the strongest main event you've ever seen in your life, it has to be said. What do you guys think of this? Not just the fight itself, but the move from Ajagba to associate himself with Dana White's boxing league. Will it be a long-term thing for Ajagba? Will it make fights between Ajagba and other top 10 heavyweights difficult now? Because we've been told from people like Eddie Hearn. You know, how reliable can he be with regards to talking about his rivals? We don't know. But we've been told that the fighters who signed to Zuffa Boxing are on long-term deals. So it's not like, for example, when Eddie Hearn signs somebody, it might be a 3-fight deal, 2-fight deal. No. We're hearing that with Zuffa Boxing, they're signing for long-term deals, years, and multi fights. So what do you guys think about this move from F.A. Ajagba to sign, apparently, with Zuffa Boxing? Let me know in the comments. Rich Franklin says, Prince Charles. Here you go. Rather than walking the earth like a god, walking the earth like a dog. Tony S says, joke fight when Kabayel fought Neba. They put a still of the ring top 10 heavyweight rankings. None of them are fighting one another. Now you can add Ajagba to that list now. Warren Williams says, FA just going with anyone. Won't he with PBC? But yeah, he was with PBC before he went to Top Rank. That's right. Even Uncle Phil says they are just 2 fights away from exposing them for terrible contracts. JR says, have you bothered to see the new Naz movie? Do you have an opinion on all the tension being raised between Naz and the Ingle disciples? I haven't seen the movie. I don't really intend to watch the movie. It looks cheesy as hell to me. I've seen the interview with Johnny Nelson. I saw an interview with Dominic Ingle. The whole 25% thing. The thing about Naz is that he was a very exciting fighter and actually an underrated fighter by today's standards, because people keep turning up in the live chat, some of my streams, claiming that he was the most overrated fighter in history, which is just bizarre because he lost one fight on points to an all-time great in Barrera, and that makes him the most overhyped fighter in history. I mean, just absolutely bizarre. Naz won legit world titles. He beat American world champions and Latino world champions for legit titles. He was a very, very good fighter. And one of the best punchers I've ever seen at featherweight. A fantastic puncher. But obviously he was known for his showboating. And one thing Naz pointed out recently, actually, which is true, is that Barrera ducked him. Barrera swerved him for many years, by the way. They tried to make that fight. I think when Barrera was still... Barrera was a super bantam, and then he moved up to featherweight. And it is absolutely the case that Barrera was swerving Prince Naseem for a good while. And bear in mind, during that whole period, Barrera ended up getting knocked out by Junior Jones, right? Poison Junior Jones inflicted the first loss on Barrera's record. So all around that time, Barrera was swerving the Prince Naseem fight. And Prince Naseem was goading him constantly, saying, Barrera's this, he's that, blah, blah, blah. So Barrera built up all of that resentment in his heart for Prince Naseem, goading him and calling him a duck and all this kind of business. So when he fought him, that's why Barrera was so spiteful. Because this is a guy who's been running him down over the years, right? But be that as it may, Prince Naseem was known for being an arrogant personality, okay? I don't like throwing this word out there because people do it far too often. But let's just say Prince Naseem certainly has some narcissistic traits about him. And one of the things with people who are strongly narcissistic is they don't see things from the perspective of others. They only want to see things from their own perspective. They disregard the perspective of other people around them a lot of the time, okay? And so Prince Naseem saying Brendan Ingle was all about the money, and he's talking to a young kid saying, I'm going to take 25% off you, etc. Well, Brendan Ingle trained and, to my knowledge, managed Prince Naseem. So the trainer fee and the manager fee is right there in the 25%. That's pretty standard. So Prince Naseem really doesn't have a leg to stand on complaining about that. Obviously, once he reached a certain level in boxing and was making a lot of money, he wanted to renegotiate terms. They couldn't come to terms. I guess Brendan Ingle still wanted his 25%, and Prince Naseem was like, no, that's too much. In that situation right there, I really can't pick fault with either side, all right? Each guy's got their own perspective. Brendan Ingle put a lot of work in to build Prince Naseem to where he was. So he's thinking about not just, receiving a cut for the fights Prince Naseem was having at the time he was having them, but also all the work he's done in the past. So that's why he felt like he was entitled to continue getting 25% moving forward, whereas Prince Naseem was like, nah, I don't think it's justified for him to continue getting 25% of these enormous purses I'm now getting. It's the exact same situation with Gennady Golovkin and Abel Sanchez, why they parted ways. Because Golovkin didn't want to give Sanchez his standard trainer's fee anymore. I don't think Sanchez was managing Golovkin. I think he was just training him. All right, so the training fee might be whatever it was, 15%. And Golovkin was like, nah. After he did that big deal with DAZN, I ain't paying this guy a percentage of all these massive purses. I'll give him a flat fee. And Abel Sanchez was very upset by that, and that's why they parted ways. So same situation with Prince Naseem and Brendan Ingle. To me, it's not really a big scandal. Do you know what I mean? It's like a pretty standard and common dispute that happens in boxing. It is what it is. If Brendan Ingle really was all about the money, surely he would have just taken the flat fee that Prince Naseem was offering him, Or maybe he thought that he could produce a new Prince Naseem, or maybe he thought he could, with his other stable, with the rest of his fighters in his stable, have enough success that losing Naseem wouldn't matter financially. I don't know. But I don't find it a particularly compelling beef, to be honest, between Prince Naseem and the Ingles. To me, it's just like standard boxing stuff. Happens all the time. Big up Ali for the super chat. He says, just joined the live stream. Have you already discussed the Itauma pullout? What did you make of it? Your reaction? Yes, I have already discussed the Itauma pullout. All we can do right now, Ali, is speculate. The official reason is that Itauma's injured. There's rumors that it's a hamstring, but there are other people speculating that Itauma wasn't looking good in camp because he enjoyed himself a bit too much over Christmas. There's rumors that the guy likes to drink and he likes to womanize. These are rumors. They're unsubstantiated. All right, I'm just throwing out what people are claiming online. And there's also the fact that he's very inactive. And with a young guy like that, who's a precocious talent, who's getting all this adulation and all this praise, it's easy for someone like that to go off the rails if they're not kept active. It's easy for them to get distracted with stuff in their personal lives and whatnot if they're not kept active. So someone has got to sort out the lack of activity with Itauma. Someone's got to do something about it. Now, obviously, you can't force a fighter to fight more frequently. So for all we know, it's Itauma that's not wanting to fight as often as he should be. Or it could be the people around him trying to make a lot of money out of him too quickly, right? By selling loads. This is a guy who really should still be fighting on undercards, just to get him out, just to get him active. He doesn't need to be headlining. I'm not saying it's wrong for him to headline at all, but he doesn't need to be headlining for every fight that he has. Yeah? Get him active, get him out on undercards, even if he's just knocking over pies. Keep him doing that while you're trying to negotiate and search for more meaningful opponents. Yeah? Activity is absolutely crucial for this young man. Moses Itauma obviously is not the guy on screen. I'm just going over what I said earlier on in the live stream regarding Itauma. Big up Ali for the super chat. He says, being honest and truthful, The injury must be legit. He has no reason to avoid Franklin. He will deal with him in fashion and with ease. Well, the fight has been postponed. So the fight hasn't been called off. I don't think anyone would think that Itauma would avoid Franklin, that he'd be afraid of Franklin. The speculation is that Itauma has maybe pulled out because he isn't having a good camp through lack of discipline, through maybe, enjoying himself over Christmas, putting weight on, drinking, being distracted by his personal life, etc. That's what people, not that he'll be afraid of Franklin at all, more so that he's not really living the life and training the way that he should. That's what people are speculating about. They could be totally wrong. Perhaps Itauma's had a fantastic camp and he's just got an injury. At the end of the day, boxing is a contact sport. Injuries are inevitable. Shout out to Ali for the super chat. Yes, the fight has been rescheduled. So let me just bring up the screenshot here. So the fight was set to take place at the back end of this month, January 24th. It's now been rescheduled for March 28th. Now, that is a long period to reschedule, right? 3 months. What's all that about? I mean, that would tend to support an injury, but if it isn't an injury, is it poor ticket sales? Because some people complained that the fight wasn't being promoted very well? Or has he really gone off the rails with people claiming that he's boozing and womanizing and all that to such an extent that he looks shambolic in the gym and they're thinking we need several months to get him back on track? I don't know. You guys have at it in the live chat. Tell me what you think. That's right, Ali. It's rescheduled for March 28th at the same venue that the fight was supposed to take place at the back end of this month. JC says, what injury? No one knows the injury. Yeah, and that is one of the things which understandably is going to make people a little suspicious. When someone's injured and it's a legit injury, well, let's hear what the injury is, But we're just hearing he's injured and there's no details of what the injury is. So obviously that's going to lead to speculation. So some people are saying that Itauma looks like a stoner. Look, I don't know. One thing I'll say, and I mentioned this earlier on in the stream, Itauma always comes across like that. Before the Dillian Whyte fight, before all of his fights, he's got this monotone, monged out, stoner way of talking. That's just the way he is. And that's the way a lot of these young kids now, at least in the south of England, in and around the London area. I know Itauma's actually from Kent. But he's very much similar to the youngsters in London. A lot of them talk like that. They have this kind of monged out way of talking. It doesn't necessarily mean he is a stoner. I can't definitively say he isn't, but he's always spoken like that. So the interview, which a lot of people were alarmed about, which has apparently been pulled, I didn't see anything particularly different in that interview from Itauma than I normally see from him, to be honest. He always talks in that monotone and, yeah, Moses Itauma. He's got those kind of sleepy eyes. He's always been like that. And it's total odds, isn't it? That, like, the way Itauma comes across outside the ring is totally at odds with the way he fights in the ring. Because in the ring, he's very alert, he's very sharp, he's very energetic. But outside the ring, he's literally the exact opposite. Outside the ring, he's like monotone, monged out, one-word answers. He looks like a stoner. So it's an interesting dichotomy, I guess, between the way he comes across outside the ring and the way he fights in the ring. Because in the ring, he's very alert and on it and sharp and energetic. You know what, Tony? Yes, he does look a little, there's a vague resemblance there to a young Marlon Brando in the face. there's a vague resemblance there. I can see it a little bit. A shout out to Jake Jones. He says his personality seems so negative. He's painful to listen to. If his work efforts is matching, this could be very problematic. Okay. Big up Ali for the super chat. He says Frank Warren was live on TalkSport today. Might have given an update on Moses' situation with the injury and pullout. Well, yeah, but promoters are there to take care of PR for their fighters. So let's just entertain the idea that it's not an injury and there's some other reason that Itauma's pulled out. Maybe he hasn't been having a good camp because he enjoyed himself too much over Christmas. If that was the case, do you think Frank Warren would tell us? Of course he wouldn't. He would come up with some cover story. It's an injury and this and that, and he'd get very bullish and angry about it and start getting aggressive towards anyone who questioned the cover story. That's what Frank Warren would do. That's what most promoters do, right? When a fighter pulls out for something that isn't an injury, the promoter's there to make excuses and to feed us a load of BS, okay? Now, I'm not saying that this injury is not legit. I don't know. All I'm saying is, if it isn't legit, Frank Warren's not going to tell us the truth. So bear that in mind. So irrespective of what he says on TalkSport, you got to take what promoters say with a grain of salt. In fact, a bucket load of salt. Evil Uncle Phil says, I didn't like Simon Jordan asking Don Charles about Dubois' neurodivergence. It was classless. Okay. I didn't have a problem with it personally. And it was clear that Don Charles was alluding to Dubois being on the spectrum, but he didn't want to say it. He said, one day it'll all come out. And you guys know that in the run-up to the Usyk rematch, I was saying that my hypothesis is that the reason that Daniel Dubois quits in fights is because a fighter is able to take him outside of his routine. And with people that are on the spectrum, a lot of them get very upset when they're taken outside of routine. Now, I could be way off. All right, maybe someone with a spectrum disorder doesn't work this way, but my hypothesis is that when Dubois is in the ring and he's able to hit you, getting hit back, even with hard shots and being in a tough fight, is not going to discourage him. He's used to it. What he's not used to and what's outside of his routine and what makes him uncomfortable is when you can hit him, but he can't hit you back. Now, for any fighter, even a neurotypical fighter, you're going to get discouraged to a certain extent, but perhaps that effect is more pronounced with someone like Daniel Dubois, who we all, or most of us, suspect is autistic or, has Asperger's or something along those lines, some type of spectrum disorder. And that's why in some fights he shows all his heart, but in other fights he quits because it's a byproduct, if I want to put it that way, of his autism. That's why he doesn't react in the way that you would expect him to react in certain situations. So, yeah. Shout out to Ali for the super chat. Says Jordan will get the truth out of him. Out of Frank Warren? I seriously doubt it. I seriously doubt it. Frank Warren is an absolute vet in the boxing industry. He knows all the tricks. He's extremely legally savvy. Frank Warren probably knows more about contract law in boxing than most lawyers do. I mean, like Frank Warren is very, very savvy when it comes to legalities, defamation stuff. So, yeah, I don't think Simon Jordan's going to get anything out of Frank Warren that Frank Warren doesn't want to tell him. But big up Ali for the super chat. So anyway, let's move on from Itauma, also Ajagba. There's some other stuff here. In fact, finally, we can talk about this. So these are some old thumbnails from videos I've done in the past. All right. When Adam Azim was EBU European champion at 140 pounds, he was ordered to fight Dalton Smith. He chose not to do that. Okay, now, earlier on in Adam Azim's career, I was very skeptical of him. But he's won me over with recent performances. Now, when I say won me over, I'm not saying that I am convinced he's going to be a pound for pound great or something just yet. But I'm a lot more, how can I put it? I'm a lot more convinced by him now. I've got a lot more confidence in him now than I did have, 18 months ago, let's say. So his last few performances at Adam Azim have really impressed me. With that being said, he did avoid the Dalton Smith fight when he had the opportunity to take it. He was European champion, so you're fighting at European level. You're supposed to take on your mandatories for the European title, and Adam Azim chose not to. Now that Dalton Smith is WBC world champion, he's in the driving seat. Now, some people are going to say Adam Azim does bigger numbers than Dalton Smith. I'm sure he does. But Dalton Smith has something which Adam Azim doesn't, and that is a world title. And Dalton Smith, although he might not have the profile that Azim has yet, winning that world title, and let's say he has a homecoming in Sheffield, that's going to go some way to closing the gap between himself and Azim as far as profile. So I hope this fight happens between Dalton Smith and Adam Azim. And by the way, now that Dalton Smith has become a world champion, Adam Azim is now saying that he'd love to fight Dalton Smith. But I think his promoter, Ben Shalom, wants him to win a world title first. Then the idea would be they make Azim Smith as a unification in Britain, maybe. Who knows, maybe that's something Turki Al-Sheikh would be interested in promoting. Perhaps it happens in Saudi. We'll find out. But I hope it doesn't turn out to be a Ricky Hatton Jr. Witter situation. Because you think about Ben Shalom's current position. He's basically got no one now other than Adam Azim. So is he going to want to risk his main guy, his only guy now really, against Dalton Smith? Or is he going to want to milk him for a while with maybe, if he can get him a world title and then get some easier defenses in and keep him away from Dalton Smith maybe, or keep him away from would that be Ben Shalom's more likely route that he'd want to take Adam Azim on? I hope not. I hope that Ben Shalom is as keen on the Dalton Smith fight as he's claiming he is right now. But it's not just about looking at Adam Azim's position and what he wants. You have to look at the promoter. He doesn't have a big budget on the BBC. Apparently there's going to be some type of announcement from Ben Shalom in the next week or so regarding other platforms that his fighters can fight on. Maybe they've got some type of deal with DAZN or Sky or BT or, well, what they call TNT now, ITV. I don't know, with regards to pay-per-view. We'll have to see what the announcement is, but yeah. Ben Shalom is not in the strongest position right now. Let's just put it that way. He's in a position where I would expect him to be cautious about who he matches Azim with for his own sake, for the sake of his business. But what say you? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And by the way, in case anyone tries to accuse me of being an Adam Azim hater, I've been back and forth on who I think would win between Azim and Dalton Smith. But the last time I gave a prediction, if you will, regarding who I would, pick between Azim and Smith was after Azim's last fight. And I said I would favor Azim against Dalton Smith. So I'm no kind of Azim hater, all right? Last time I spoke about picking a winner, I said I would pick Azim to beat Dalton Smith. But as I say, I'm back and forth because Smith showed me certain things in there against Subriel Matias, which I didn't disbelieve that he had. So like I went into the fight with Matias thinking that Dalton Smith doesn't have the grit and determination and physical strength. I just didn't know. Yeah, Dalton Smith, other than Zepeda, hadn't really fought anyone to tell us how formidable he was at world level. But that Subriel Matias fight showed me that Dalton Smith has got great physical strength and he's tough, and that he's able to switch up his tactics on the fly because, most people thought the thing for Dalton Smith to do would be to fight his normal fight against Subriel Matias, which is to be a bit of a sharpshooter, move around, stick his jab, sharp punches, combinations, spin off. But all of that went out the window after the first round. He realized, okay, if I try to do that, for one, it's going to be a bad visual. I might not get a points decision if I'm running around the ring, if he's able to hit me with enough shots. And number two, maybe I'm going to get tired running more than I want to run, because Dalton Smith isn't really a runner. He'll move, but he's not a runner. And so when a fighter is being forced to move more than they want to move, they can get tired more quickly. So my perception of it, my reading of it, is that Dalton Smith made a tactical decision after, let's say, round two, and said, yeah, I'm just going to have to fight fire with fire. I'm going to have to beat the fight out of this guy. I can't finesse him all night. He's too active and big for me to just try and finesse him. I'm going to have to take it to him. It was a gamble, a tactical switch up, but it was the right one, evidently, and it paid off. Okay, so Dalton Smith showed me good tactical acumen in there, good physical strength, and, the power was there, the determination, the grit, the way he was walking Matias back in clinches and whatnot. So he showed me certain things in there, Dalton Smith, which I didn't know he had previously. I never believed that he didn't have them, but I just hadn't seen. So I say all that to say that, would I now lean more towards Dalton Smith in an Azim fight? Maybe, but this is why I want to see the fight so much, because I am back and forth on who I think would win. So hopefully politics won't get, it's a big hopefully politics won't get in the way. Maybe it will take a Turkey Al-Sheikh to get involved if this rivalry continues to brew and build. We'll see. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Matt Borgerson says, can't say Azim would have beat Matias either. I mean, I don't know. I think Azim would have a better chance of implementing long-range boxing tactics for the duration than Dalton Smith did, because Azim looks like a lankier fighter with longer arms and faster hands. Would he be? I've never rated Matias, and I've said this in videos going back years now. I've never been someone that thought Matias was very good. I've never thought he was particularly good. When he first emerged on the scene and people were saying, oh, he's the boogeyman and this and that, and they were very impressed by the fact he was making all these fighters quit, I was like, I don't see it. I think if they put this guy in against Teofimo Lopez, Lopez will light him up like a Christmas tree. That is one of the easiest stylistic matchups for Lopez in the division. I was saying that at least 18 months ago or 2 years ago, that I think Teofimo Lopez would absolutely wreck Matias. A guy who's going to walk forward on Lopez like that, with no defense, no head movement. Like, nah, man, that is the kind of guy that Lopez would feast on. So that was one of the first things I was saying about Matias when he emerged on the scene. And since that time, he's never impressed me. Yeah, he throws a lot of shots. He's not a massive one-punch guy. Gets hit a lot. No head movement. And I wasn't shocked when Liam Paro beat him in Puerto Rico. I never thought Matias was that good. Shout out to Ali for the super chat. He says, Adam Azim is in a huge, tough fight and a test against the world-level fighter who in many people's minds beat Richardson Hitchens end of this month in London. Yes, he is. And a shout out to Ali. No, it's Richardson Hitchens. It's not Richard Hitchens. It is indeed Richardson. I understand people can get confused. Or Hutchins, excuse me. Yes, it's not Hutchins, it's Hitchens. But his first name is actually Richardson, not Richard, which is a little confusing because Richardson is a surname. So Richardson Hitchens is a guy with two surnames, basically. He's got a surname for a first name and a surname for a surname. So it's Richardson Hitchens. Big up Ali for the super chat. And in fact, we can talk about... oh, excuse me, I missed the super chat there from Matt Borgerson. He said, these super chats have way too many filters. CCP. Matt also says, who has Azim beat? Scobie, only jacked, can't box. And, Kurt Scobie or Scooby, however you want to pronounce his name, was all mouth, really. There's no substance there. No substance there. Matt says, Smith is not going to fight Azim. Laughing out loud or laughing my ass off. Not in 2026. So, if you can expand on that, Matt, who do you think would be the issue regarding that fight not happening? Do you think Smith wouldn't want to fight Azim right now? Or do you think Azim wouldn't want to fight Smith right now? What do you think? We got Matt Borgerson. Shout out to Ali for the super chat. He says, who Adam Azim is fighting at the end of this month beat Richardson Hitchens in a world level fight. Adam is fighting. Well, yeah, in the opinion of some, Lemos beat Richardson Hitchens. But officially, he lost the fight, right? I think it was close on the scorecards. Correct me if I'm wrong, but officially, he lost the fight. And to be fair, Lemos then went on to get knocked out by Keyshawn Davis in 2 rounds. So, this is a guy who isn't in the greatest form in the world, to be fair. All right, Gustavo Lemos is not in the greatest form in the world. Okay, you can argue the Richardson Hitchens defeat, but you can't argue what happened to him against Keyshawn Davis. He got taken out early. So, you have to bear that in mind. Big up Ali for the super chat. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. He says, Azim's whipping left hooks to the body last time were excellent. Smith's win was great on away soil. I expect this will end up being Khan versus Brook. I was very impressed by Azim's left hook to the body as well. I really liked Azim's last performance against Kurt, Scobie, whatever. The repertoire he showed. The hand speed, the whipping left hooks to the body, the jab, and also the ability to shorten his punches and take it to Scooby on the inside. He took it to Scooby on the inside when he didn't have to. He actually asked permission from his trainer, Shane McGuigan, can I take it to him on the inside? And McGuigan was like, okay. So Azim showed his repertoire in that fight. I was impressed. Again, not like Kurt Scooby's an amazing fighter, he's not. But I was just impressed by the things that Azim is able to do. The shortening of the shots and the stuff he has in his arsenal. I was impressed by the arsenal. And talking about Arsenal, I don't follow football at all, but I I know someone who does. I was surprised to find out that Arsenal were top of the league. What's all that about? Haven't Arsenal been down bad for years? Top of the league. What's going on? Shout out to Ali. He says, that was at 135 pounds. That should not have happened at that weight. He's a 140-pound fighter. Okay? Big up Ali for the super chat. So Mohammed says, Azim is a very good fighter, but if he fights Dalton now, he most likely loses. All right, you care to expand on that? Why do you think he most likely loses? Shout out to everyone locking in. Luca says, what are your thoughts on GOT? Do you mean Game of Thrones? Or is there another I know you love your acronyms. Is there another GOT that I'm not thinking of right now, or do you mean Game of Thrones? Okay, you do mean Game of Thrones. So, yeah, I watched Game of Thrones, and I thought it was entertaining. It's very silly, okay? Very, very silly. There's a lot of agenda pushing. Well, when I say a lot of agenda pushing, there's basically feminist agenda pushing in Game of Thrones. That's what it is. There's a lot of feminist propaganda they push in that show. I went into it in depth in a Patreon episode, might have been last year, where I pointed out all of the very obvious feminist propaganda in it and the symbolism and all that type of business. So if you can grit your teeth and look past or deal with the feminist propaganda in Game of Thrones, it's an entertaining show. It's entertaining. It's very silly and quite disgusting at points, but it's entertaining. I can say that. It's objectively quite entertaining. Shout out to Ali for the super chat. He says, let's go, Hatman. You nearly got 100 likes. Yeah, let me check on the likes right now. Where are we at? 96 likes. 215 concurrent viewers. Yeah, if we can get to 100 likes, that'd be good. Shout out to everyone in the live chat. If you could all stick a like on this stream, it really helps with visibility. We're now on 97. If we can get over 100, that's roughly 50% of concurrent viewers. There we go. 101. Big up. Those last few likes. Much appreciated. Simon Brandy says, are you watching the new season of Fallout? I haven't watched any of Fallout. Truth be told. I struggle to get into most series, to be honest. I did watch Game of Thrones, but that was over a very long period of time when I watched it. And I found it to be quite entertaining. Silly, but entertaining. And there are some interesting things in Game of Thrones, by the way, because Game of Thrones is in large part based on British prehistory and mythology. And that's the part that I found very interesting. Because a lot of people don't know anything about British prehistory. Because what is known about British prehistory, a lot of it comes from the Romans. Yeah? Not from recorded records of the Brits themselves. It comes from the Romans and what they saw and who they encountered when they arrived in the British Isles. Not just the Roman invasion, but even the scouting missions several centuries prior into the British Isles by the Romans, and the things that they saw and whatnot. And so that is kind of presented in mythological form in Game of Thrones, which I found interesting. Marlo says, Hatman, Fabulous or Lloyd Banks? Fabulous. I'm not a big fan of either one of them, but Fabulous. CMMC says, afternoon, Hatman. Speaking of series, have you seen Prison Break? Yeah, I found Prison Break to be very, very silly. Not a big fan of Prison Break. Just a very silly show. I'm not really into prison and crime stuff, but the exception I do have when it comes to prison dramas is as far as I'm concerned, the best prison drama of all time, Oz. Yeah, Oz for me, hands down, the best prison drama ever. The HBO series Oz. That was something, that I could watch, but Prison Break was just silly. It was very unrealistic and very silly. Matt Borgerson says, ancient UK was predominantly Germania. Actually not. There was a pre-Germanic population living in Britain that were encountered by the Romans. And the Romans, Tacitus wrote about that Caesar visited Britain. It would have been maybe 150 years BC. And then Tacitus about 100 years AD. And they both spoke of two distinct populations that were living in Britain at the time. One of them was a Germanic, what they call Gaul population, tall, red-haired or blonde-haired, and the other one was much shorter, darker and whatnot. So they spoke about two distinct groups, and that is presented in Game of Thrones, because in Game of Thrones, you had the men who came from the continent and they moved into Westeros, and then you had the children of the forest who had been living there before them. And that is based on British prehistory. That's based on what the Romans saw. They encountered two distinct populations of people who looked phenotypically different from each other. A short group who were dark-haired and stuff like that, and then a much taller group who were blonde-haired and red-haired, who were seafaring. They lived on the coast and all that kind of stuff, whereas the short group, they lived in the forests. Hence, in Game of Thrones, they called them the children of the forest. Big up Ali, he says, do you think if Adam and Dalton fight, they will see out, or I guess you meant to say sell out a stadium in London? It's a huge British fight. Good needle in it. Yeah, if they continue winning, then absolutely. They could sell out a stadium. If they both continue winning and they continue building this rivalry over social media and stuff like that, then absolutely they could be selling out stadiums and whatnot. And it's definitely needed for sure. Boxing thrives on rivalries. Goozy says, Oz is underrated. Yeah, Oz was a great show. Obviously, there's a lot of horrible stuff in there because at the end of the day, prison is a terrible place where bad stuff happens. Afro Jam says Gauls were Celtic. Germanics didn't take over until the fall of Rome in Britain. Well, that is something I would dispute, because Gauls are basically proto-Germanic people. Later on, they would become known as Germanic, right? But Gauls are basically proto-Germanic. They are the ancestors of the Germanic people. Celts, there's a lot of people who actually dispute the whole notion of Celts. Yeah, there's a lot of people who will tell you that what today is referred to as Celts are actually an amalgam of different ethnicities, and they've broad brushed it as this Celtic population of people. There's a historian, but what was his name now? He's from Wales. I think he's passed away recently. But he did a lot of work on that, on like on the Celts and whatnot. And there's a lot of historians that will tell you the same thing. They dispute this whole notion of a monolithic Celt culture. They think it was a lot more complicated than that. And certainly, I'm no professional historian, but from what I've delved into, I would say that the Gauls were like the precursors of the Germanic people. They were the progenitors of Germanic people. But what some people call the Picts and these other names that they have for the prehistoric Britons, they were not Celtic. Yeah, they were not. They were some other group that is very mysterious, but they were not Celtic. No, that's wrong, Afro Jam. Celt is a modern word that they use to describe prehistoric Britons. They didn't call themselves Celts. That's a modern word. That's totally wrong. Afro Jam says the Proto-Germans were from Scandinavia and northern Germany, and that is where the Gauls came from. Hence, blonde hair, red hair, they came from northwestern Europe. And some say, some anthropologists say originally they came from actually Eastern Europe or the northern reaches of Eastern Europe, and then came down through into the northern parts of Western Europe and eventually into the British Isles. And they are the people who became the Celts. Or you could say that, who became Germanic people, the progenitors of Germanic people from a cultural perspective. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of admixture among, most groups of people around the world, but including Western Europeans. Western Europeans are very admixed. So there's admixture from the Middle East in Western Europeans. There's admixture from, whoever, Celts, from Germanic people, from, there's admixture from all over the place. Admixture from North Africa. So there's all sorts of admixture. And there's admixture from the indigenous prehistoric populations of Britain in modern Europeans today as well. So at the end of the day, there's admixture from all sorts of different groups. But the way that what I'm talking about is from a cultural perspective. The Gauls were Proto-Germanic people from a cultural perspective. You look at the culture that they were practicing, you can see how Germanic culture developed from the culture. Again, they were seafaring, the Gauls. They were, into the British Isles and throughout Europe and whatnot. Anyway, shout out to Matt Borgerson. He says, Celts using large two-handed weapons is a false story from the Romans to spread fear among the people. They mostly used farming tools. Fun fact. Again, from the research I've done, there were two distinct populations in Britain. There were the tall, red-headed or blonde-haired people, and there was a much shorter population of people, and they were distinct culturally and distinct phenotypically. And I don't know how proficient the smaller group was in combat, but I would imagine that the Gauls, being seafaring people, they would have been more proficient in combat. Because if you're traveling around from place to place, you're going to encounter hostile, people. So you're going to have some type of combat ability. Yeah. Whereas if you're hiding out in the woods of ancient Britain, prehistoric Britain, maybe you'll be fighting with other tribes of your own, but probably not to the same extent as you'd be fighting with a foreign group coming in. Or, if you were seafaring, not as much as you'd be fighting with natives in the places that you land, right? A shout out to Manny Fresh. He says, is YouTube your main gig or a side hustle? I have multiple streams of income. Right now, YouTube's more of a side hustle, but there have been times when YouTube, so for example, when the Partridge Usyk thing and when the AJ Wilder rivalry was at its peak, the monthly income from YouTube was very high. All right. It's nowhere near as high as that these days. So there are times when, yeah, YouTube will supersede, as in terms of a single source of income, it will supersede my other sources. But for the most part, no. So it really depends on what's going on in boxing. But yeah, during that whole AJ Wilder rivalry, I was clearing some crazy, numbers, monthly income numbers on YouTube alone. And with the Partridge Usyk stuff as well, I was getting up there for several months. But at this stage, there isn't really anything like that going on in boxing. No big conflicts like that. Shout out to Ali. He says, you missed my super chat from previous. Apologies. Let me get your super chat here. Also missed the super chat from Matt. Apologies. Matt says, Hamza Shiraz could sell out in UK right now. That versus Mbilli or Pacheco would do big numbers. Shiraz is popular. My dad even knows him, and he's old. Well, Shiraz has become more popular stateside because of the fact he knocked out Belanga. Did a job on Edgar Belanga. So that obviously did Shiraz's popularity stateside a world of good. And he was already popular in the UK, but stateside, that really helped him. So globally, yeah, Shiraz is in the ascendancy. Could he fill out a stadium? Well, he could certainly sell out an arena. Certainly sell out the O2 or the Co-op Arena in Manchester without a shadow of a doubt. Against the right opponent, maybe you could do good numbers at a stadium with Shiraz, but he might need a bit more building before we get into that territory. Ali says Tottenham will be a good stadium to sell out. Yeah, but again, I do think that they'll need to build their rivalry a bit more, Azim and Dalton Smith, to the point where they could sell out Tottenham. At least that's my perception currently. They'll need to build their profiles a bit more. And it should be doable with Adam Azim's association with the BBC now. Yeah? We criticize Ben Shalom and the fact he lost his Sky deal and all this kind of stuff. Well, a lot of people do. But there might be a silver lining in that particular cloud with regards to the platform the BBC gives you to promote certain talent that you have. Adam Azim can do all sorts of shoulder programming on the BBC. Interviews and all that sort of stuff, which will expose him to an audience that he wouldn't have been exposed to on DAZN. So with that, yeah, there's the potential you could build it up enough to be filling out a Tottenham stadium for a Dalton Smith fight. Absolutely. Do I think Usyk Kabayel will happen in 2026? I suspect it won't. I hope I'm wrong, but I suspect it won't. I think someone's going to get beat before that fight happens. Either Usyk will get beat or Kabayel will get beat. Simon Brandy says, Hatman, have you ever considered branching outside of boxing on YouTube? True Geordie, for instance, does boxing, but also current events. Being a knowledgeable guy, I'd love to see your take on politics. Well, I talk about all that stuff on Patreon. I've been talking about stuff other than boxing on Patreon since 2017. So I've been doing that for a long time now on Patreon. That's where I do that stuff because, doing it on YouTube is a very slippery slope. You can easily get zapped. Once somebody reaches the level of a true Geordie in terms of the size of his audience, that you've got much greater recourse if you do get zapped on monetization. You'll know people inside of YouTube, and there's a much better chance of you you know, rectifying the situation. But I'm nowhere near that big. So I do the sensible thing and don't put all my eggs in one basket. When I do make content that is not about boxing, I don't do it on this platform. I do it on Patreon. Ayad says, Hatman, surely videos about Mothman would be okay. Yeah, I've done episodes about the Mothman of Point Pleasant, which is totally bizarre. And in fact, if you want to check out my latest Patreon content, non-boxing content, for those who are interested in very weird stuff, like witchcraft in Africa and bizarre creatures that people claim to have seen in Africa, make of it what you will. I just did an interview with a young lady here in Africa where I live, 24 years old. And she told me a story about a bizarre thing that she saw. Totally bizarre. You can listen to most of that interview on my Patreon page now for free. So if you click the link in the description, you'll be taken to my Patreon page. You can scroll down and see the latest episode. The first 10 minutes of it are available to listen to for free for anyone. You don't need to sign up to anything. Just go there, press play, and it'll play the first 10 minutes for free. An interview I did with a young African woman who, in the course of normal conversation, told me, oh yeah, well, I won't give it away here. Go listen to it on my Patreon page. And I've spoken to many, many Africans over the years who tell you these things with a completely straight face, very matter of fact, that they have seen bizarre stuff. They're not trying to sell you a story. They're not trying to get famous. They're not trying to, prank you. In fact, I started laughing when this young lady was telling me this story because the story was so bizarre. And she looked at me with puzzlement as to why I was laughing. The story of what she saw was so bizarre, I couldn't help but bust out laughing. So check that out on my Patreon page. KD versus the world says that Zambian girl's story was hilarious. It literally was hilarious, bro. When you're coming from the perspective of someone who was raised in the West, and you hear these stories from people that are raised in places like Africa or the Far East about bizarre creatures, and you just, what else can you do but laugh? I'm not discounting the possibility that she actually saw what she said she saw, because she wasn't alone. It was like a bunch of people, and this is a very well-known creature in Zambian folklore, right? And these people say it's not folklore, it's real. So I don't know what to do with it, bro. It's like the Mothman in Point Pleasant in West Virginia. Those people in West Virginia to this day, some of them are still alive, and they will tell you with a straight face, we saw this thing. We saw this giant, like, moth-type creature. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a giant crane. We saw it close up. And they tell you it with a straight face. All right? Now, you could argue that because the Mothman thing became so big and was in the press in America at the time, that it could be a bunch of people clout chasing and looking to get attention. But in the case of the people that I've interviewed, these are people that have never spoken on a public platform about the things they've seen. Do you know what I mean? These are people who are not running to the press. It's just in the course of normal conversation with some of these people I've spoken to, African people I've spoken to over the years, they come out and tell me about these bizarre things that they've seen firsthand in many cases. Totally bizarre. Make of it what you, I don't know what to make of it. Have a listen to it for yourself and, you tell me what you think. Totally bizarre. A big up Ali for the super chat. He says, is there any need to see Troy Williamson rematch Callum Simpson? In my view, no need for it. So that's a good question. Callum Simpson, and I hate using these terms because, fans get sick of the business side of boxing, but Callum Simpson was obviously the A side. So in a sense, he gave Troy Williamson an opportunity when he decided to fight him. Troy Williamson was always going to benefit far more from a victory in that fight than Callum Simpson was going to benefit in terms of their career moving forward. Callum Simpson was, quote unquote, supposed to beat Troy Williamson, whereas Troy Williamson wasn't supposed to beat Callum Simpson. So when you look at that dynamic, you say, well, a rematch doesn't need to happen. There was no controversy. Yeah? So I agree with you on that. It definitely doesn't need to happen. But at the very least, you can understand why Callum Simpson would want it to happen. And Troy Williamson, it's a take it or leave it situation. He'll probably get paid a lot more for a rematch. And, you know, he's a blue-collar fighter. He hasn't made a load of money in his career. So he might weigh up the options and look at, well, I can fight Callum Simpson for a load more money in the rematch. I've already beaten him once. Even if I lose the rematch, it's still a big payday. And my stock has already risen. So unless Troy Williamson were to get blasted out in a rematch, even if he lost to Callum Simpson, he'd retain, to some extent anyway, the benefits of that victory he had over him, as far as public profile and whatnot. So, I don't know, it's up to Troy Williamson at the end of the day. But yeah, there was no controversy. The fight was won in decisive fashion by Troy Williamson, 100%. We got Ali for the super chat. He says his career is on the line. Yeah, I mean, you know, look, I had an amateur boxing career. I never achieved the things I wanted to achieve for various reasons. I never got to turn pro. So I don't want to sit here and start sounding like I'm slagging off a guy in Callum Simpson who has achieved far more than I achieved in boxing. But from an objective perspective, I'm trying to be as objective as possible. I looked at this Callum Simpson guy coming up through the ranks and people were raving about him and he was selling a lot of tickets. And I just didn't see any special talent there. He was just one of these guys that sells loads of tickets and from my perspective, didn't really have any kind of special talent. Maybe, is he from Burnley or Barnsley? It's one of those two, Burnley or Barnsley. Maybe they're devoid of fighters to follow in that part of the Northwest. I don't know. But for whatever reason, they got behind Callum Simpson and he became a ticket seller up there. But yeah, to me, he never looked like he was going places. Just my opinion. Okay, it's from Barnsley, not Burnley. All right, Barnsley. A shout out to Ali. He says, Troy Williamson was beat by Ishmael Davis and Josh Kelly, who is now fighting for a world title. Yeah, I remember the Josh Kelly-Williamson fight. That was a good performance by Josh Kelly because it wasn't too long after he'd lost to Avanesian. And that fight was at 154 pounds. Obviously, the Avanesian fight was at 147. And obviously, they're both from the Northeast. Josh Kelly handled Williamson comfortably. Didn't have any issues with him. Handled him comfortably. Totally outboxed him. And had plenty left in the tank at the end of the fight. Matt Borgerson says, I mute commentary now since Loma, now Matthias. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. Shout out to Ali. He says, David. Okay, spelled it wrong. Ishmael Davis. It is, not David. Yeah, Ishmael Davis. A big up Simon Brandy. He says, True Geordie gets invited to Saudi events. Where's your invite, Hatman? Has a TV broadcaster ever asked you to get involved as a boxing pundit? So they've never asked me to get involved as a boxing pundit on television. I've been kind of tapped for positions previously in the boxing media, but not necessarily a television pundit. I was tapped. I was approached recently. I won't say by who, but a major organization in boxing, major media organization in boxing, but they were just looking to integrate my own content onto their platform rather than have me as a. But truth be told, I don't really want to be, on Saudi shows being a pundit. I don't really want to do all that. If I really pushed for it, I'm sure I could be doing what True Geordie does and all that kind of stuff. I don't really want to do that, truth be told. Yes, it's, I'm sure, a load more money, but I enjoy my digital nomad lifestyle of being able to move around different countries, travel when I want to travel, do things at my own pace and at my own time. I don't really want to be obligated to be, flying out here for this show and flying out there for that show. And I don't really want to be doing all that. I'm sure I would make loads more money than I'm making now if I did do it. But it's just, I like having my freedom to do things at my own pace and at my own time. And I also enjoy my privacy. I don't really want to be a public figure like that. So, yeah. Big up Simon Brandy for the super chat. Much appreciated. And I've told this story many times before, but I was approached by a promoter back in the days and asked to promote a particular fight on my channel, right? And I won't say too much, but I was basically approached by a promoter who was promoting one of the Partridges. I'll leave it as vague as that. One of the Furies, a promoter of one of the Furies, approached me and asked to promote one of their fights on my channel. On my channel, excuse me. And as the reason that one of the reasons I didn't do it, nothing to do with disliking the Furies, because this was a very long time ago. One of the reasons I didn't do it is because they didn't offer me any money. They offered me like VIP tickets to the fight. They put me up in a hotel. I get to have a signed, I get to take pictures with the fighter, and I've signed, merchandise and all. I'm not a fanboy. I don't care about any of that. The fight, I think, was in Manchester. So I could have made it up there if they'd offered me money, but instead they're offering me all this stuff, as if I'm some kind of fanboy or something. I don't care about any of that. Oh, you'll get to meet the fighter. I don't care about meeting the fighter. Don't care. There isn't a fighter on earth who I particularly care about meeting. Show me the money, like Jeremy. If it's like a one-off to promote one fight on my channel, you want to run ads for a particular fight on my channel, I can do that. Show me the money. That's it. Don't talk to me about ringside tickets, and I don't care about none of that. Respectfully. Ishmael Davis, Ali says. Yes, Ishmael Davis. A big up Matt for the super chat. He says, I think Kelly will 100% get KO'd by Bakram. His gas tank will fail him after 8. And that has been a theme in Josh Kelly fights, hasn't it? Speaking of Ishmael Davis, yeah, Josh Kelly nearly fell apart against Ishmael Davis. At the back end of that fight, he was holding on for dear life. And Ishmael Davis took that fight at short notice. So he does have this thing in him, Josh Kelly, where he tends to fall apart when pressure is put on him. But that didn't happen against Troy Williamson for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they're familiar with each other. Sometimes familiarity allows you to be more comfortable and confident against a particular opponent. And Josh Kelly and Troy Williamson are very familiar with each other, both from the Northeast. So maybe that's why Josh Kelly was so, again, comfortable in the ring against that guy. And Murtazalayev against Josh Kelly. Yeah, I think Murtazalayev is going to win the fight too. I mean, Adam Booth is acting confident, but sometimes that can be a front. At the end of the day, Josh Kelly hasn't delivered on the promise that Adam Booth believed he had. So, he can't be skirting around at British and European level forever. At some point, you got to pull the trigger. It's now or never. And so that's what Adam Booth, as his trainer and manager, is doing. But yeah, I think Murtazalayev is going to win the fight as well, Matt. Big up, Matt. Lays says, not one. How about legends of boxing that are still alive? Yeah, not one. There is not a boxer alive walking this earth who I have any desire to actually meet. I don't. What do I get out of meeting him? You know, what do I actually? Because I don't get starstruck, and I don't feel like, because somebody's famous and they've achieved a bunch of stuff, punching people in the head. They're still a human being with arms and legs, and you know what I mean. As much as I respect their talent, I don't pedestalize them as like a great person. They're a human being. I can learn things, but another thing is meeting fighters. These guys have been interviewed a gazillion times by other people. What new can they tell me in person that I haven't heard in an interview or a documentary? Do you know what I mean? So I really don't care about meeting fighters. And I have met fighters, but it's not something that I'm particularly bothered about. Well, I've met Mike Tyson in London. He came to Brixton, where I grew up, and then later on, he was staying at the Dorchester. I think it was a Dorchester on Park Lane in London. I went down there and saw Mike Tyson there, and was struck by how small he was. This was a very long time ago. I was struck by how small the guy was. Obviously, I knew he was short for a heavyweight, but he's not like broad-shouldered or anything. He's got like he's quite a compact guy. He's not like this big, broad-shouldered guy. So I was struck when I saw him how small he was. But yeah, I've got no desire to be meeting fighters. Not like I'm against. If our paths crossed, I wouldn't be running up to try and get an autograph with him. But if through some organic process I ended up meeting a fighter, I'd talk to him. Do you know what I mean? But it's not on my bucket list. Let's just put it that way, to be meeting any fighters. Big up Ali for the super chat. He says, Hatman, do you know Ishmael Davis leading up to the Josh Kelly fight? He made some life-threatening shots to him saying, your life is on the line. This is legit. I'm not aware of that. Was it in the build-up to the fight, or was it behind the scenes? Are you talking about just fight talk? Hype, saying, your life is on the line in this fight? Or do you mean he made some kind of threats behind the scenes, as in, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but, fighters do that kind of thing. As in, say that your life is on the line in this fight because I'm going to beat you so badly. That's been known to happen. A shout out to Ali. He says, Hatman. Okay, yeah, I've read that one. Big up Ali. A shout out to Matthew Wilson. He says, I know exactly what fight and promoter you are talking of. All I will say is shades of Ali. Because I have mentioned who it is, I think in my Element group and also maybe on Patreon. But on YouTube, I've never actually named the promoter in the fight. Big up Matthew Wilson. All right, he's in the know there. Simon Brandy says, Hatman, you grumpy sod. I'd love you to eat partridge. And you know how Sod's law is? He's probably the fighter I'm most likely to just run across randomly. because I criticize him so much, right? I'm probably far more likely to randomly come across Partridge somewhere on my travels than Usyk or, anyone else. I might run across Partridge in Barbados because I have been known to frequent Barbados as a holiday goer. And so does Partridge. Partridge goes to Barbados. Barbados is a small place. You could easily bump into Partridge in Barbados. Evil Uncle Phil says, off camera, I think Partridge is probably decent. Well, Partridge evidently is very, very personable to the people who he decides to be personable with. Okay? Partridge is someone who definitely knows how to make people like him. And the reason I say that is because he has this cult-like group, right? He's developed like a cult around him. Yeah? You got Joseph Parker, who's supposed to be a rival of his, ended up being his biggest cheerleader. You're not going to be able to do that unless you know how to make people like you. So, yeah, behind the scenes, Partridge knows how to turn the charm on and make people like him. Without a shadow of a doubt, he knows how to do that. And that's why so many of his ex-gym members and stuff like that speak so highly of him, because he knows how to make people like him. He knows how to turn the charm on and be Mr. Nice Guy behind the scenes and funny, and he knows how to do all that. Very, very good at it. That is a skill that his dad, John, totally lacks. So John is what you get when you strip away the social skills that Partridge has. Yeah? That Luke has. Luke Partridge has got social skills that his dad doesn't have. But I think beneath the social skills of Partridge is basically his dad. Maybe a slightly less narcissistic version of his dad, but basically his dad. That's what's underneath the nice guy routine that Partridge puts on behind the scenes. But yeah, Partridge has got much better social... Luke has got much better social skills than his dad, John. Way better. Simon Bradley says, Partridge never gets old. I told Alex Krasuk on Instagram his real name. Alex always responds to messages, a cool guy. Yeah, I kind of miss Krasuk. He was a fun character. Because now, Usyk has just got... who's the manager called for Usyk? He manages loads of those Eastern European fights. What's his name again? Can somebody tell me the name of Usyk's manager? Krasik was his promoter. Klimas, thank you. Igor Klimas. I'm not making any accusations here. But Klimas, to me, Klimas seems like a very rough character. Like, just looking at him, to me, he looks like someone with a rough background. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm misjudging him here, but it's like the look in his eyes and his old demeanor and everything about Klimas, he seems like a rough guy to me. You know what I mean? He seems he seems like the kind of guy who you wouldn't want to cross him. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. There's something a bit dark there with Klimas. I guess other people share that perception. Clemus. Jake Jones says he's got a cold persona, a bit dead in the eyes. Yeah, very dead in the eyes. And indeed, exactly as you say, a cold persona. Donk says Clemus was in prison, I think, for quite a while. So I'd read something like that somewhere, but when I went to go try to confirm it later, I couldn't find anything about it. So I don't want to say for sure that he's been in prison, but I read somewhere that he'd been in prison for some pretty serious stuff. But when I went to confirm it at a later time, I couldn't find anything again. So is that just unsubstantiated rumors? I don't know. But if it did come out that he had that kind of background, I wouldn't be surprised, because he just comes across as a very rough guy to me. You know, yeah. And when I say rough, I don't mean he's any good at fighting necessarily. I just think, you know what I mean. Big up Ali for the super chat. He says, it's on the final press conference at Wembley on Joshua card. Okay, it was on the final press conference at Wembley. This was serious. Just go on the final undercard press conference and watch the exchange between the two. You will know everything. Okay. Between Ishmael Davis and Josh Kelly. All right. So you're saying it wasn't just fight talk, you know, hype talk, but there was something more serious going on. All right. I mean, someone saying something at a press conference, I tend to take it with a grain of salt. So for example, James Toney back in the 90s used to routinely threaten to have opponents shot. James Toney was pushing this whole gang thing back in the 90s when he was world champion. Acted like he was all gang affiliated and this and that, and if you disrespect me a certain way, I'll have you shot. James Toney was saying this at press conferences. Needless to say, none of his opponents ever got shot. So I take that kind of talk with a grain of, I mean, Derek Chisora, right? After that brawl in Germany with David Haye, he was like, I'm going to physically shoot David Haye. Everyone remembers that. So, you know, I take these things with a grain of salt. That was hilarious. I forgot about that. Derek Chisora, I'm gonna physically shoot David Haye. I'm gonna burn him. We got Matt Borges, and he says, have you seen 2,000 meters to Andriivika? But I'm struggling to pronounce that. No, I haven't. What is that, a movie? 2,000 meters to Andriivika? Andriivka? I haven't seen that. We got Ali for the super chat. We got Matt for the super chat. I'm just waiting for Matt to tell me what that is. 2,000 meters to Andriivka. Big up Ali. He says, no more serious final press conference on Wembley Joshua card. All right. Jake Jones says he's got KGB vibes. He does. He does. He does have that kind of energy about him. Indeed, Lays. Not physically, yeah. You know, rather than metaphor, he's not going to metaphorically shoot him, not figuratively shoot him, but physically do it. Just wanted to let us know that he was extra serious. I'm going to physically shoot David Haye. Never has Derek Chisora been so triggered in his whole boxing career as he was then. Oh, it's a movie about the thing in Ukraine. Okay. Okay, no, I haven't seen it. Ali says, watch the full exchange. Ishmael Davis, got it. Ishmael Davis, Josh Kelly, Fight Week, press conference, got it. I'll have a look at that after the stream. Big up Ali for the super chat. Indeed, he glassed me. Lay says, sorry I came into the stream, late into the stream. Do they have a replacement for Franklin or just scrapping the whole event? The entire event is being postponed until the back end of March. So as it stands right now, all the fights are still going to go ahead. Itauma's still going to fight Franklin. It's just going to happen at the end of March. Okay, Matt says it's a documentary on the brutality of the situation in Ukraine. Really heavy stuff. Okay. Simon Brandy says, all this Klimas talk has me in the mood to watch Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Which is better, Lock, Stock, or Snatch? I prefer Snatch. Simon Brandy says, Snatch being the Partridge movie. Yeah, I prefer Snatch over Lock, Stock. Lock, Stock, you know, Guy Ritchie was really just trying to perfect his formula. He hadn't yet perfected his formula in Lock, Stock. That's the, you know, that movie had Lenny McLean in it. For me, yeah, Snatch is the movie I prefer. Bricktop was such a great character, you know. So many great one-liners from Bricktop. Michael says, has there ever been someone so hyped up as Itauma so early in his career? Yes, and far more hyped up than him. I mean, I remember when Joe, was it pronounced Messi or Macy? I want to say Messi. Baby Joe Messi, or Macy, however you want to pronounce it. Was he Messi? Was that his name was spelled M-E-S-I? He was an Italian-American heavyweight. And I think he retired undefeated, didn't he? Did he have a draw in his record or something? He had some kind of brain problem that caused him to retire. But when he was on the way up, they were saying, well, he's the new Rocky Marciano. He's the new Rocky Marciano. You know, the Italian-American community got behind him. They were hyping him up to high heaven in the media and whatnot over in the United States. I mean, there have been loads of fighters that have been hyped up more than Itauma. Itauma's only really hyped up within boxing circles. He's not a crossover star in the UK yet. You know, most people don't know who Moses Itauma is in the UK. But, you know, there have been fighters in the past who have been way more hyped up than that. I mean, David Price was probably more hyped up than Itauma. There was probably more people who knew who David Price was at the same stage of his career than know who Itauma is now. It's just that Itauma's being associated with, you know, Mike Tyson, but he's not the first guy to have been called the new Mike Tyson. I mean, George Arias, the Dominican American heavyweight based in New York, he was called the new Mike Tyson. I mean, good God. He was called the new Mike Tyson. You can find, you know, videos where Ellie Sackback is like, the new Mike Tyson, George Arias. So that new Mike Tyson thing is as old as the hills. There's always a new Mike Tyson somewhere, or the British Mike Tyson, or this Mike Tyson. I mean, like, Mike Tyson gets overused as a comparative more than any other heavyweight of all time, probably. But with Itauma, it wasn't so much about his boxing style. It was just about his age and the fact he's so talented, so young. But stylistically, he's nothing like Mike Tyson. I think everyone can see that. Indeed. Snatch, do you know what nemesis means? Yeah, that was a great one-liner. I also like the bit where Bricktop asks Jason Statham's character, Turkish, to put the kettle on. And Turkish says, do you take sugar? In fact, let me do a better Statham. So do you take sugar? Slightly better. And Bricktop's like, I thank you, Turkish. I'm sweet enough. That whole movie's full of great one-liners. I'm sweet enough. Indeed, Gassiev even called himself Iron, right? Gassiev was the new Mike Tyson. Everyone's the new Mike Tyson. Big up Ali for the super chat. It says, Hatman, what is going on with the cruiserweight Isaac Chamberlain, Vidal Riley, Alois Jr., Chris Smith? No news at all. That's a good question, Ali. Vidal Riley, we know, is signed to KSI, which is just a weird move. How serious is he when he's signing to a promoter that has no real experience in professional boxing? He's got experience putting on big events and, you know, doing pay-per-view numbers, KSI, right? But in terms of putting on real fights with real, like, there's no experience there. So you look at Vidal Riley and he's turned down opportunities to sign with the likes of Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn. And he's instead signed with KSI, which is where he started from a money-making perspective. Obviously, he's been boxing for many, many years, in the amateurs and whatnot. But in the pro game, Vidal Riley got his first taste of money being a trainer for YouTubers. That's how he built up this big social media following. So he said the offer he got from KSI monetarily was far superior to what he was offered by the other promoters. That may be the case, but you can only cash that check if you get the fights. Can KSI get you the fights? It's a weird move for me by Vidal Riley. He's like somebody who wants to stay in his comfort zone. And sometimes in order to achieve the things you want to achieve in life, you got to get outside your comfort zone. So an eyebrow raiser for me, Vidal Riley signing with KSI. Isaac Chamberlain, I don't want to see Isaac Chamberlain fight, bro. I'm so done with Isaac Chamberlain. No disrespect to the guy, nothing against him, but he doesn't interest me as a fighter at this point. Alois Jr. and Chris Smith, yeah, Alois should be a lot more active. I'm not sure what's going on with him, why he hasn't got any dates, why he's not more active. I'm not sure what's going on there. Chris Smith, I think he does have something lined up. I forget who they're looking to match him up against, but I think Smith has got something lined up. But with Alois, I'm not sure what's going on. A big up Ali. Yeah, he's asking the questions there that are kind of just answered. But yeah, I would say that I'm not interested in seeing Isaac Chamberlain fight. Chris Smith, I think, has something lined up. Yeah, I think it's Massey. Yes, I think it's Massey. I think they're lining up Chris Smith to fight Jack Massey. I think that's who it is, yes. Pretty sure it's Jack Massey. Linkage says, what happened to Tommy Fletcher? Well, he got beat, and then he's kind of fallen off the radar, hasn't he? after getting beat. Evil Uncle Phil says, Aloys is quiet after getting called out. I think failed a PED test. Announcement soon. Well, I've got no knowledge of that. If you say that he's failed a PED, I've got no knowledge of him failing any PED test. As far as I'm concerned, that's unsubstantiated. I don't want to accuse somebody of something they haven't done or hasn't been proven to have happened. But we'll see, right? Aloys is in that Ben Davison camp. We'll see what happens. Aloys is promoted by Frank Warren, right? He's a Frank Warren fighter. Even Uncle Phil says, Riley called him out. He was dead quiet. Okay. Ali says they're in the same stable. But please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, Queensbury. Yeah, Queensbury fighter. And, you know, Frank Warren normally keeps his fighters outside of the heavyweight division. He normally keeps them busy. So, who knows what's going on there with Aloys Jr. Your guess is as good as mine. But Chris Billam-Smith, I think, is fighting Jack Massey. We got Waved. He says, Hatman, these lives are the best thing to listen to in the gym. And what are you doing in the gym right now? I guess you're doing weights, or are you on the treadmill? So JR says, all Bricktop stable are a bit stagnated. The Turkey Queensbury situation being a little turbulent at the minute, or at the moment, is probably the reason. Yeah, well, as I understand it, Turkey is quite a fiery individual behind the scenes. Okay, quite fiery. And I mean, Eddie Hearn has spoken about this, how Turkey will be very, very fiery with him behind the scenes and cuss him out and all sorts of stuff like that. Eddie Hearn's the kind of guy who will take that for the sake of business. I have always wondered whether Frank Warren would be willing to take that kind of thing from anyone. You know, he's a very, very prideful man, Frank Warren. And if he's been spoken to in a way that he doesn't like, you know, he's not going to grin and bear it the way that Eddie Hearn would grin and bear it. he's just not. It's not in his nature. So obviously we're all speculating here, but I wonder whether there's been some kind of bust up behind the scenes, because both of them are fiery characters, right? Turkey's fiery apparently behind the scenes, and Frank Warren's fiery. So maybe there's a clash of personalities there. Even Uncle Phil says it's a seniority thing as well. Indeed, with Frank Warren being much older. Wave says Frank Warren is ruining the heavyweight division by not matching his guys against each other. I can't argue. Although he has matched some of his guys against each other. So we have to, you know, be completely real. Joseph Parker versus Fabio Wardley was 2 Frank Warren fighters. Goozy says Turkey is doing that TKO thing. He has no need for promoters now or in future. So here's my take on that. I think that Turkey is hedging his bets. I don't think that Turkey has necessarily decided that he's going to dispense with the promoters and do this TKO thing yet, or put all his eggs into the TKO thing yet. I think he's hedging his bets. In the same way that he's been flirting with Netflix, right? Now, Turkey is not a promoter per se, or you could describe him as a promoter, I guess, because Riyadh season is, but he's certainly a financier. And it's unusual for a promoter or a financier that has a deal with a broadcaster to then be flirting with a different broadcaster, a rival broadcaster. That's unusual. And I think it speaks to what I'm saying here, and that is that Turkey's kind of hedging his bets. He's trying to see who could do a better job for him. Can DAZN do a better job for him, or can Netflix do a better job for him? Can Eddie Hearn do a better job for him, or can Frank Warren do a better job for him? Or can Nick Khan and Dana White do a better job? I think he's kind of hedging his bets and seeing who performs best. Like in a business, in any business, Donald Trump in The Apprentice, right? Or Alan Sugar in the UK version of The Apprentice. You see how people perform. You let them all do the same task. And whoever gets the best results, you say, okay, I'm going to go with you. So I don't think he's necessarily put all his eggs in the TKO. I could be wrong, but my perception is I don't think he's put all his eggs in that TKO basket just yet. But they're maybe being prioritized now to see how well they get on. And then he'll make his final decision. That's what I suspect is going on. We got Ali for the super chat. It says Simon Jordan loves to make the point. Frank and Eddie couldn't speak for 15 years and took Turkey to get them to squash the beef and make the fights. And it's a great point. And with Turkey maybe tightening the purse strings now and not being so gung-ho with putting on these shows with Warren and Hearn, we're seeing a return of the bad old ways. I did a video about this the other day. This whole Jaron Ennis, Virgil Ortiz situation is like the bad old days all over again. Promoters negotiating publicly. We want this percentage, we want that. It's like, oh my God. This is exactly what it was like pre-Turkey. All of this carry-on was like a weekly thing. And sometimes it would drag on for years. Years! The Mayweather-Pacquiao thing dragged on for years. Yeah. These public negotiations that can drag on for years, man. Terrible. And for a while, that stuff was minimal when Turkey emerged on the scene. But we're seeing the re-emergence of it now, that Turkey's pulling back a bit. All right, peeps, gonna draw an end to this very early live stream. It's late afternoon now in the UK. Here where I am in Africa, it's 2 hours ahead. So early evening. I'd like to shout out everyone for joining the conversation. A special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. Just refresh my tab here to acknowledge you guys. So special recognition to Ali, Hader, his contributions. Matt Borgerson. Just scrolling through here. James Clifford. Manny Fresh. Big up Manny Fresh. Simon Brandy, of course. Matthew Wilson. Think I've read everyone's name out there, but especially big up Matt Borgerson and Ali. Is it Haida or Haida? Big up, much appreciated. And shout out to everyone else who joined the conversation. It's been a blast. Until next time, take care, be good. Have a good evening. We'll catch you on the other side. I'm out.